It is Wednesday, it's the 16th of July. I'm Moon Gon-young. This is Arirang News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. President Park Geun-hye's first major cabinet shakeup is nearly complete. The Korean president appoints a new intelligence chief and 4 ministers. 3 posts remain vacant. No extra budget this year, but other fiscal alternatives are in store to bolster Korea's economic recovery, says the nation's new finance minister, and that includes expanding next year's budget spending. And the 5 of BRICS nations agreed to create their own development bank and emergency reserve fund, widely seen as alternatives to Western-led institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. We'll have those stories and more, but first let us begin this Wednesday afternoon right here in this country. Following a series of failed personnel nominations, President Park Geun-hye has announced the appointments of 5 new cabinet members. This, of course, with a long list of state affairs hanging in the balance. Our Choi Kyoung-hwan reports that the president is determined to move forward in running the nation and seeking greater cooperation with the National Assembly.
President Park Geun-hye has appointed 5 of her cabinet nominees who were confirmed by Parliament last week. Her spokesperson said the president appointed Choi Kyung-hwan as the new finance minister and deputy prime minister and Lee Byung-gi as the head of the National Intelligence Service on Tuesday. She also appointed Choi Yang-hee, Lee Ki-kwon, and Kim Hee-jung as the ministers of science, labor, and gender equality, respectively. And despite the parliament's disapproval, President Park went ahead and appointed Chung Jong-sub as the new security minister. The president, who retained the current prime minister after her 2 previous nominees stepped aside and who withdrew her nomination for education minister Tuesday, cannot afford further delays in handing over state affairs to a new cabinet. After dropping Education Minister designate Kim Myung-soo, who was grilled by Parliament over allegations of thesis plagiarism, President Park quickly nominated Hwang Woo-yeol, her political aide and a prominent figure within the ruling party. Hwang is close to the president, and if confirmed by the National Assembly, he would join new Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan as the president's 2 deputy prime ministers, a move likely intended to expand cooperation with the parliament. Meeting with the ruling and opposition parties' leadership in recent days, President Park sought the parliament's cooperation on a series of bills to revitalize the economy and others to reform the government and public sector in the aftermath of April's ferry tragedy. Meanwhile, Culture Minister nominee Chung Sung-keun, who was not confirmed by the National Assembly, dropped his bid Wednesday morning. Choi Kyoung-hwan, Arirang News.
And the 5 new cabinet ministers did not waste a second. They got straight to work this morning. Korea's new Deputy Prime Minister for Economy and Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan, for one, definitely has a lot on his shoulders, and in his first day on the job, he promised to aggressively pursue steps to stimulate the economy until it picks up momentum. Our economics correspondent Laah Hyun-kyung has the details.
Low growth, a downsized economy in pursuit of better place, an absence of notable results. I think this is the reality we are faced with.
New Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan has made it clear that he will be proactive in his new role. In his inauguration speech Wednesday, Choi said passive macroeconomic policies have caused the Korean economy to slow down and have also resulted in less tax revenue. One of his plans to tackle those problems was to reform unnecessary restrictions that keep businesses from finding new investment opportunities.
When companies do well, they will, in return, create more jobs and up the earnings for households, which will spend more. We need to establish this virtuous cycle in order to strengthen domestic demand.
As he has long been hinting since being nominated, Choi reiterated plans to ease the debt-to-income and loan-to-value ratio regulations for mortgage loans to prop up the real estate market. Choi said it's inevitable that the nation's growth outlook will be revised down, but added the ministry will not seek a supplementary budget this year. Experts say the biggest challenge for Choi will be boosting consumer sentiment, which dipped after the April Seoul ferry disaster, and also breathing life into the sluggish housing market without drastically increasing household debt. Laah Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Well, Korea's central bank governor agrees that regaining consumer sentiment is essential to stoke economic growth. But he cautions against lowering interest rates, citing ballooning household debt as a major threat to this economy. Here's our Song Ji-sun.
Mounting household debt. That's what Korea's central bank chief thinks is the biggest threat to Korea's economic health. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol expressed concern on Wednesday that household debt is rising at a faster rate than income growth and that loan extensions are growing, particularly in non-banking institutions. Lee told an economic forum in Seoul that overall household debt is not expected to develop into a financial system failure, as high-income earners account for 70% of total household debt. But the low-income earners are having trouble paying off their bills, with those spending more than 40% of their income servicing their debts, which accounts for 11% of debt holders last year, up from 9% from a year earlier. Lee was on the same page with the new Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan that spurring consumer spending and corporate investment are the keys to bolstering growth. But he said lowering key interest rate leads to a rise in household debts, eventually hurting purchasing power. As for the overall economic outlook, he added that growth would recover in the third quarter of the year, but there were risks of lower than expected growth in view of the volatility of the Korean won and the lack of confidence among businessmen and consumers. The central bank lowered its economic growth outlook last week by 0.2 percentage points to 3.8% for this year. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
While the leaders of the BRICS nations are forging a multi-billion-dollar financial alliance. The world's top 5 emerging economies agreed Tuesday to establish a development bank to rival Western-dominated institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. Connie Kim reports on the landmark agreement that could radically overhaul the existing global financial order.
The leaders of the 5 BRICS nations have signed a deal to launch a $100 billion development bank and a currency reserve pool with the aim of challenging Western-dominated institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The new development bank, announced at the 6th BRICS Summit in Fortaleza, Brazil on Tuesday, will fund infrastructure projects in the founding members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as well as other developing nations. With its headquarters in Shanghai and India as president the first year, the bank will start out with $50 billion in capital, with each BRICS country paying in an equal amount. Total capital is expected to eventually double to $100 billion. A so-called contingent reserve arrangement will also be created where each country will put in a designated amount in case of a currency crisis. The contingency fund will amount to $100 billion, with China contributing $41 billion, followed by Brazil, Russia, and India putting in $18 billion each, and South Africa chipping in $5 billion. BRICS represents about 42% of the world's population and accounts for roughly 1/5 of the world economy. The launch of the institution is being seen as a landmark achievement as the 5 countries started summit talks in 2009 to counter the influence of the West. If everything goes according to plan, the new development bank will start lending in 2016. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
South Korea's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jun-guk will meet with his Japanese counterpart Junichi Ihara for talks in Tokyo on this Wednesday. Well, North Korea's recent military provocations will top the agenda, along with ways to restart the 6-party nuclear talks. Now, the multilateral dialogue, which is aimed at denuclearizing North Korea, includes the 2 Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, but it has been at a standstill since 2008. Well, there have been rumors of a possible visit by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to North Korea, and the 2 nuclear envoys will touch upon Tokyo's recent discussions with Pyongyang. Of course, Seoul and Washington have expressed concerns that Japan's talks with the North might affect their trilateral security alliance. Meanwhile, the U.S. says any effort to liken North Korea's missile launches to its joint military exercises with South Korea is inappropriate. Well, U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki says that the North missile launches are conducted without warnings and are clearly designed to raise tensions. While the annual military drills between South Korea and the U.S. have been carried out regularly and openly for about 40 years now. Pyongyang fired off multiple artillery shells into the East Sea on Monday, one day after another round of missile launches. North Korea watchers say the provocations are protests against the joint South Korea-U.S. exercises that begin this Wednesday.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-young live from Seoul.
Global shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. The United Nations Human Rights Committee has begun a regular two-day examination of Japan's human rights record. Now, this is according to Japan's Kyodo News Agency. 18 legal experts from the United Nations body are looking at a number of issues dating back to the Japanese military's forced sexual enslavement of women leading up to and during World War II. Now, they will also examine more current issues, including Japanese nationalist groups that hold regular demonstrations against ethnic Koreans and immigrants and the state's use of capital punishment. The committee requires states that have ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to submit reports on their human rights record every 5 years. Now, at the end of the month, the committee will advise Japan on areas where improvements are needed. Meanwhile, over in the Middle East, Israel has resumed airstrikes on the Gaza Strip and warned of an intensified offensive after Hamas rejected a ceasefire proposed by Egypt yesterday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he had no choice but to widen and increase its aerial operation. Now, this as Israel saw its first casualty in the 8-day-old conflict. Israel has held its fire for some 6 hours before resuming its aerial assault in the afternoon. Well, Hamas said it could not accept a truce that offered no real gains for the faction, particularly as nearly 200 Palestinians have been killed in the conflict. It called for more international mediation that could prevent future clashes. Now, over in Moscow, investigators are still looking for the exact cause of a subway derail that happened on Tuesday local time. At least 21 people have been killed and many more have been injured, and the death toll is expected to increase. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
During rush hour on Tuesday morning, a crowded subway train went off the rails in Moscow. More than 24 hours later, Russian authorities say at least 21 people are dead and more than 100 are injured. The death toll is expected to rise as dozens among the hospitalized are in critical condition. The crash took place around 8:35 a.m. local time when 3 cars on the train, which was traveling at 70 kilometers per hour, braked suddenly between 2 stations in the west of the capital city.
I was in the very front carriage, and it was a great shock. The lights went out and people fell to the ground.
The train stopped abruptly, and the passengers fell to one side. There was smoke, and we were trapped inside.
The exact cause of the crash has not yet been determined, but emergency officials blame a power surge that scrambled the metro's electronic control systems.
We are investigating all possible causes of the crash, except for one which we have ruled out, a terrorist attack.
Moscow's mayor has declared a day of mourning for the dead. The capital's subway system is used by some 11 million people every day, and despite being one of the world's oldest underground railways, fatal accidents like this one are rare. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, on a different note, the Brazil World Cup came to a close earlier this week, with Germany, of course, taking home the coveted trophy. But they weren't the only ones happy with how the World Cup panned out, though. Korea's biggest tech firm saw their ultra-high-definition TV sales go through the roof as fans bought new TVs to watch the matches. Samsung Electronics says its UHD TV sales in Korea doubled now during that time in June compared to the previous month, and sales of curved UHD TVs grew at a similar rate. Now, LG Electronics says its sales nearly tripled in the second quarter compared to the first quarter. A major electronics store chain says TVs were the biggest selling item this year as consumers decided to upgrade their TV sets to watch the World Cup in ultra-high quality. A growing number of college students are choosing to spend their summer breaks here in Korea, not on vacation, but to shore up their academic credentials. They're taking advantage of Korean universities that offer summer courses, and they are gaining a better understanding of Korea in that process. Our Shin Se-min went out to take a look.
Socializing with Korean students and immersing themselves in cultural activities. Students from over a dozen different countries gather at a Korean campus. They are taking part in an international summer course program for students and professors that a growing number of private universities in Korea provide.
With nearly 100,000 international students currently residing in the nation, more colleges are designing programs and scholarship opportunities in hopes of bringing the world to Korea.
To differentiate their experiences while spending the summer in Korea, universities have expanded the number of science and technology-related courses, which is something students expect due to Korea's tech-heavy reputation. Universities also send students outside the classroom and into internships at Korean-based companies, organizations, and even broadcasting stations. The opportunity to spend a summer overseas while adding college credits isn't reserved for those with money readily available.
As a non-profit organization, we, the university, have the obligation to foster young students regardless of their background. So we try to broaden our view by inviting students from developing countries and eventually letting globalization work on our campus.
Great benefit for us because we get to come here with the scholarship so that we can have a good opportunity to stay here, like learn about new things of Korea people.
Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Well, let's move on to the cultural front. A new photo exhibit in Seoul features the works of U.S. photographer Jordan Matter. Now, he first gained worldwide recognition for his project called Dancers Among Us. He is premiering more than 60 new images in Korea, and our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won sat down with him to find out what it is that inspires him.
It's all about the joy and passion of being alive. None of these images have been digitally modified, and the dancers and the photos aren't relying on the help of wires or trampolines to enhance their jumps. Photographer Jordan Matter's works aim to reflect the beauty and wonders of everyday life, capturing what he calls that one magical moment.
You go through this series of events every single day that we just pass through without any sort of like recognition of their beauty and of the specialness of them. The magical moments means to me, stack all of the moments of your life up together and make each one as magical as possible.
First inspired by his 3-year-old son, who was living a life full of joy and full of wonder in the moment, Matter came up with the idea of taking pictures through the eyes of a child. He thought dancers would best represent the beauty of each passing moment.
They embody this kind of beauty and this emotion, and they're able to physicalize that and show us a story. And so it made perfect sense if I wanted to create and almost make the ordinary extraordinary in a way and show everyday moments, but make them more extreme and more beautiful.
His works have touched the hearts of many, and his book, Dancers Among Us, made the New York Times bestseller list. He says for the best results, he always lets spontaneous moments happen.
All of it is serendipity. All of it is luck. If you can try to allow life to happen and then to react to it, as opposed to trying to hold on so tightly and control it, if you can let go of control a bit, then you will be very happy to see all of the surprises that await you.
During his stay in Korea, he will collaborate with Korean dancers and Taekwondo martial artists to capture more magical images that represent the wonders of life. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, magical wonders in photos that may be, but we now have a segment on medical tools that were used in the Joseon Dynasty. And for that, of course, our Im Yoon-hee joins me for our daily arts and culture segment. So Yoon-hee, you have a museum that displays some of the medical tools that were used way back by the royal family during Korea's Joseon Dynasty.
Right, so when going to a museum, you wouldn't expect to see like a medical textbook, a scalpel, but these tools are very special because they were used by the royal family, by those doctors hundreds of years ago. Now, most of these artifacts are from the Handok Medical Pharma Museum, which was the first medical museum here in Korea. So take a look at what some of the doctors were doing hundreds of years ago. This white porcelain kettle, topped with this fitted lid, often used with these spoons. These are just a few of the many tools used during the Joseon Dynasty to treat illness and disease. The National Palace Museum is displaying a plethora of precious artifacts from the Joseon Dynasty in an exhibition featuring the tools and equipment that were used by medical practitioners over the 5-century period that ended in the late 1800s. Everything from folding screens displaying the 10 traditional symbols of longevity to books holding the age-old secrets for good health and a long life were used to treat the royal family.
This small table was used to hold the porcelain medicine bowls. If you look at the very bottom, you can see a healthy and long life represented through the turtle ornamentation and lotus flower-shaped patterning.
The tools of the trade may look unfamiliar to the doctors of today, but they represent a part of Korea's history and culture that is important to preserve.
During the Joseon Dynasty, the royal family was not safe from disease. So we created this exhibition to show people the richness of the Joseon royal family's daily life.
Although the use for these paintings, tools, and books is long gone, many of them have been marked as national treasures and important folklore cultural heritage items. And each still has so much to offer hundreds of years later.
Well, definitely not something that you would find in a regular museum. And you mentioned earlier that some of these items are from the Handok Medical Pharma Museum.
Right.
It's a mouthful, right?
Right, so actually the exhibition you just saw at the National Palace Museum, so that exhibition is dedicated solely to those tools used in the Joseon Dynasty at the Royal Palace. But this Handok Medical Pharma Museum is really special because it was the first, like I said earlier, medical museum here in Korea, but it also kind of documents Korea's medical history through the years. So you see hundreds of years of histories and tools that doctors use. So a very unique opportunity there. And so they have over 10,000 artifacts at that museum, a very unique museum, and some of these are considered cultural, priceless artifacts that, really are valuable to our culture.
Right, right. And we get to find out, I suppose, how developed Korean medicine and I suppose surgery was back in the days, back in the Joseon Dynasty, and how it has evolved over the years as well.
Right. So they do offer a lot, and they're also offering these special lectures as well. That the National Palace Museum is offering these lectures starting on the 19th, so just in a few days. And it's an opportunity for viewers and for those interested to learn more about the tools that you see at the exhibition, but also just to learn more in general for those who are curious, because many people really are curious about, what doctors were using back then.
Right, right. It's part of Korean history and definitely a unique way of learning the Korean history. All right, Yoon-hee, thank you so much for that report, and we will check back with you tomorrow.
I'll see you then.
Good afternoon. It's another hot and steamy day here in Korea with highs well into the 30s. And since we're in the monsoon season, there's more moisture in the atmosphere than the usual, which makes for even more humid conditions. And currently, it's very cloudy all across the nation, and the monsoon's rain has subsided, but it will resume tomorrow in the most parts of the nation and continue until Friday over in the central region. And going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 32 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will both peak up to 29 degrees. Moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 27. Dokdo also peaks up to 27, while Gyeonggang tops to 29. Well, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanyang.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. Another very hot, sticky day today here in Korea. Bear with it, and I'll see you back here at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.